Have you ever heard of an army that won a battle without a single soldier firing a shot? An army made of rubber, wood, and pure imagination. This is the story of Operation Fortitude South, one of the most audacious and brilliant deceptions in military history. In early 1944, the Allies were preparing for the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted. But they faced a colossal problem. The German war machine, though battered, was still formidable. The success of the Normandy landings depended on one crucial factor: keeping the powerful German 15th Army, stationed at the Port of Calais, pinned down and away from the real invasion beaches. But how could they convince the Germans that the main attack was coming at Calais, the most logical and heavily defended point on the French coast? The answer was pure genius. They decided to create a ghost army. This wasn't just a simple trick. This was a full-scale production, orchestrated by the sharpest minds in the Allied command, from the London Controlling Section to SHAEF, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. They knew they had to play on German expectations. The Germans expected the invasion at Calais, the shortest route across the English Channel. The Allied plan was to give them exactly what they were looking for. And so, the 1st United States Army Group, or FUSAG, was born. It was a magnificent, completely fictional army group. On paper, FUSAG was a massive force, larger than the actual invasion force destined for Normandy. It had its own divisions, its own corps, and its own commanding general. But on the ground, in the fields of southeast England, it was an army of illusions. Imagine flying over Kent in a Luftwaffe reconnaissance plane. What would you see? You'd see sprawling camps filled with thousands of tents. You'd see row upon row of Sherman tanks glistening in the sun. You'd spot airfields crowded with fighter planes and bombers, and vast supply dumps stacked high with crates and barrels. You'd see harbors bustling with landing craft, all seemingly poised for an imminent cross-Channel attack. But if you looked closer, you'd realize it was all a mirage. The powerful Sherman tanks were actually inflatable rubber decoys that could be pumped up in minutes. The formidable aircraft were nothing more than wooden frames covered in canvas. The mountains of supplies were just empty boxers and oil drums, cleverly arranged to look like a logistical masterpiece. The bustling headquarters were just camouflaged tents with a few radio operators transmitting fake messages. This phantom army even had its own fake infrastructure, including dummy oil docks and pipelines, all meticulously designed to fool German aerial photography. But a ghost army needs a ghost commander, and the Allies had the perfect man for the job. A commander so feared and respected by the Germans that his very presence would lend undeniable credibility to the entire charade. That man was General George S. Patton. By 1944, Patton was a living legend. His aggressive, hard-charging style had made him the American general the German high command, and Hitler himself, feared the most. After a controversial slapping incident in Sicily, Patton was sidelined without a major command. The Allies turned this problem into an opportunity. They deliberately and very publicly assigned Patton to lead the fictional FUSAG. To German intelligence, this was the ultimate confirmation. Why else would the Allies place their best tank commander in charge of an army group in southeast England, directly opposite Calais? Unless that was where the main blow would fall. Patton played his part to perfection. He toured his command, reviewing his non-existent troops and giving fiery speeches to empty fields, all for the benefit of any German spies who might be watching. His very reputation became the centerpiece of the deception. But visual trickery and a famous general weren't enough. The Allies needed to feed the Germans a steady stream of intelligence to reinforce the illusion. This is where the double agents came in. The most famous of these was a Spanish double agent codenamed Garbo. His real name was Juan Pujol Garcia, and he was a master of deceit. Garbo had successfully convinced the German intelligence service, the Abwehr, that he was their most valuable spy in Britain. In reality, he was working for MI5. Garbo ran a network of 27 sub-agents, all of whom were completely imaginary. From his small office in London, he and his handlers concocted a torrent of detailed and plausible reports. These messages, painstakingly crafted by the deception planners, described the movements and preparations of FUSAG's fictional divisions. They spoke of troop concentrations, embarkation rehearsals, and Patton's plans for the assault on Calais. The Germans trusted Garbo so completely that they swallowed every word. They even awarded him their highest decoration, the Iron Cross, for his services to the Third Reich. From January to April of 1944, the pieces of this grand deception were meticulously put into place. It was a high-stakes gamble. Thousands of people, from set designers borrowed from British film studios to radio operators and intelligence officers, worked in secret to build an army that existed only in photographs and radio waves. They were creating a weapon not of steel and explosives, but of information and psychology. The goal was simple, yet monumental: to build an army so believable that it would hold back hundreds of thousands of German soldiers from the real battlefield. The fate of D-Day, and perhaps the entire war, rested on the success of this ghost army and its phantom commander. This was the birth of FUSAG, the army that never was, but which would play one of the most decisive roles in the liberation of Europe. Ever wonder how the Allies convinced the entire German high command to look the wrong way on D-Day? It wasn't just about inflatable tanks and rubber airplanes. It was a full-blown information war, a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. Welcome back to our series. Today, we're diving deep into Chapter 2, the Information War, and exploring how Operation Fortitude South became one of history's greatest headfakes. Between April and early June of 1944, the Allies escalated their deception from a physical illusion to a powerful psychological weapon. The plan was simple in concept, but incredibly complex in execution. Create a phantom army so believable that the Germans would stake everything on its existence. This ghost army was the first U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, supposedly commanded by the one and only General George S. Patton. The Allies placed this fictional force in Kent, directly opposite Calais, the one spot Hitler was absolutely convinced the invasion would land. The backbone of this illusion was a sophisticated network of radio deception units. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer scale of this operation. Specialized teams broadcast thousands upon thousands of hours of completely fabricated radio traffic. Day and night, the airwaves crackled with the life of an army that didn't exist. There were messages detailing unit movements, urgent supply requests for ammunition and fuel, mundane weather reports, and even the casual chatter of soldiers and training exercises. Every single message was meticulously crafted to mimic the patterns, protocols, and unique fingerprints of a real army preparing for a massive invasion. German radio interception units were listening, and the Allies gave them an entire symphony of lies to decode. But radio chatter alone wasn't enough. To truly sell the lie, the Allies needed to feed the Germans seemingly credible intelligence from human sources on the ground. This is where Mi-5's legendary double-agent network comes into play. These were German agents who had been captured by the British and turned to work for the Allied cause. They became the most trusted voices whispering falsehoods directly into the ears of German intelligence. The undisputed star of this network was an agent codenamed Garbo. His real name was Juan Pugal Garcia, a Spanish citizen who despised the Nazi regime and had, on his own initiative, offered his services to the British. At first, they turned him down. Undeterred, he went to the Germans, got himself hired as a spy, and then promptly went back to the British, who finally realized what a valuable asset he could be. Garbo was a genius of deception. He created a fictional network of 27 subagents, each with their own distinct personality and access to different types of information. His reports to his German handlers in Madrid were masterpieces of fiction, so detailed, so consistent, and so plausible that the German military intelligence considered him their most valuable asset in Britain. They trusted him completely. In fact, his intelligence was so highly regarded that the Germans awarded him the Iron Cross for his services to the Third Reich. He received the award for betraying them more effectively than any other agent in history. Through Garbo and other double agents, the Allies fed Germany a steady stream of information that perfectly reinforced the FUSAG narrative. A typical report might detail Patton's fiery speech to his officers or describe the massive buildup of landing craft in the ports of Dover and Folkestone. Every piece of fabricated intelligence was designed to confirm what the Germans already wanted to believe. FUSAG was the real invasion force, and any military activity spotted in southwestern England near Normandy was just a small-scale diversion. This leads us to the most brilliant part of the whole operation. Fortitude succeeded not because the Germans were incompetent or blind, but because they were trapped in a powerful feedback loop of their own creation. This is known as confirmation bias. Hitler himself was utterly convinced that the shortest route across the English Channel, the Pas-de-Calais, was the only logical place for an invasion. His entire high command shared this conviction. This entrenched belief system became the Allies' greatest weapon. When German intelligence analysts received information, they didn't evaluate it objectively. Instead, they actively looked for evidence that supported their Calais theory. Garbo's reports about FUSAG felt right because they fit the pre-existing narrative. Any ambiguous evidence, like reports of troop buildups in southern England, was easily dismissed. They would reason, that must be the diversion we were warned about. Even contradictory evidence was often twisted to fit the mold. German reconnaissance flights might fail to spot the massive army in Kent, but instead of questioning FUSAG's existence, analysts might conclude that the Allies were simply masters of camouflage. The Germans saw exactly what they expected to see. Their own certainty blinded them to the truth that was hiding in plain sight. They had mountains of data, but their interpretation was fatally flawed. They were so confident in their analysis that even on the morning of June 6th, as Allied troops stormed to the beaches of Normandy, the German High Command held back their most powerful panzer divisions. They kept them waiting in Calais, poised to repel an invasion that would never come. The phantom blow from Patton's Ghost Army. This chapter of history frames the psychological dimension of fortitude as one of the greatest triumphs in the history of It was a war fought, not with bullets, but with information. Not with armies, but with perceptions. The Allies didn't just build a fake army. They hacked the German command structures, decision-making process. They exploited a fundamental human weakness, the tendency to believe what we want to believe, and turned it into a strategic advantage that saved countless lives and changed the course of the war. The story of the radio operators, the double agents like Garbo, and the German confirmation bias is a powerful reminder that in warfare, the battle for the mind is just as critical as the battle for the ground. It's a stunning example of how deception, when executed with brilliance, can be more powerful than any weapon. June 6, 1944. The largest amphibious invasion in history begins. On the beaches of Normandy, thousands of Allied soldiers are storming ashore under a hail of German fire. The air is thick with the sounds of battle, the cries of men, and the thunder of naval bombardments. The longest day has begun. For the German commanders on the front lines, it's a scene of pure chaos. They're facing an overwhelming force, a tidal wave of men and machines crashing against their defenses. Frantic messages fly back to headquarters, painting a grim picture of the situation. They need reinforcements, and they need them now. Every man, every tank, every gun could mean the difference between holding the line and a complete collapse. But miles away, in his headquarters, Adolf Hitler sees things differently. He receives the reports from Normandy, but he's not convinced. To him, this massive invasion, this earth-shattering assault, feels off. It feels like a feint, a clever trick. He believes the Allies are trying to draw his best forces into a fight in Normandy, only to unleash their real main attack elsewhere. And he thinks he knows exactly where that attack will come. The Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. This conviction wasn't just a random guess. It was the result of one of the most brilliant and elaborate deception campaigns in military history. Operation Fortitude. For months, the Allies had been feeding the Germans a steady diet of lies. They created a phantom army, the first U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. This ghost army was supposedly stationed in southeastern England, poised to strike at Calais. It even had a famous, fearsome commander, General George S. Patton, a man the Germans respected and feared more than almost any other Allied general. Of course, FUSAG didn't really exist. Its barracks were empty, its landing craft were inflatable dummies, and its radio traffic was a carefully scripted performance. But the Germans bought it completely. Their spies in Britain, many of whom had been turned into double agents by the Allies, sent back glowing reports of FUSAG's strength and readiness. Their reconnaissance planes flew over England and saw exactly what the Allies wanted them to see. Vast fields packed with tanks, trucks, and artillery. These weren't real tanks, of course. They were giant, inflatable balloons, cleverly arranged to look like a massive armored division from the air. Allied deception crews worked tirelessly, moving these fake vehicles around, creating fake tracks in the dirt, and simulating the day-to-day activity of a real army preparing for war. The illusion was perfect. So perfect, in fact, that even as real Allied soldiers were fighting and dying on the beaches of Normandy, Hitler clung to the belief that the real invasion was still coming. He was waiting for Patton. He was waiting for the attack on Calais. This unwavering belief had devastating consequences for the German defense of Normandy. Stationed at the Pas de Calais was the formidable German 15th Army. This was no Seconde unit. It comprised 19 divisions, packed with some of the best troops and panzers the Wehrmacht had left. This was the strategic reserve, the powerful counterpunch that could have been sent rushing to Normandy to drive the Allies back into the sea. The commanders on the Normandy front, like Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, begged for these divisions. They saw the beachhead expanding day by day. They knew that if they didn't get reinforcements soon, the foothold would become a permanent fortress. But Hitler refused. He was adamant. The 15th Army was to stay put. He saw the Normandy landings as a large-scale diversion, nothing more. He was convinced that releasing the 15th Army would be playing right into the Allies' hands, leaving the route to Germany's industrial heartland wide open for Patton's Phantom Army. The German High Command was paralyzed by this belief. Every piece of intelligence seemed to confirm it. The ongoing fake radio chatter from FUSAG, the continued sightings of dummy equipment in Kent, the reports from their compromised Spizit all pointed to Calais. The Germans were trapped in an echo chamber of Allied deception, hearing and seeing only what the master illusionists wanted them to. Imagine the frustration of the German generals in Normandy. They're fighting for their lives against a relentless enemy, and they know a massive, powerful army is sitting just a few hours' drive away, doing nothing. Days turned into a week, then 2. The Allies poured more and more men and material into their beachhead. They linked up the landing zones, pushed inland, and began the brutal, grinding fight through the dense hedgerows of the Normandy countryside. And still, the 15th Army waited, even when it became clear that the Normandy invasion was far too large to be a mere diversion. The ghosts of FUSAG haunted the German High Command. Could they risk moving the 15th Army? What if Patton struck the moment they did? The fear of this second invasion was so deeply ingrained that it overrode all logic. The Allies had not only predicted Hitler's reaction, they had manufactured it. They understood his rigid mindset, his tendency to micromanage, and his suspicion of his own generals. They played him like a fiddle. The deception continued for an astonishingly long time. For more than 7 weeks after D-Day, while the battle for Normandy raged, the bulk of the 15th Army remained in Calais, guarding a coastline that would never be attacked, against an army that didn't exist. By the time Hitler finally accepted the truth that Normandy was, and always had been, the main event, it was far too late. The delay was fatal. Those crucial 7 weeks gave the Allies the time they needed to secure their position beyond any hope of being dislodged. They had landed over 1 million men, thousands of vehicles, and vast quantities of supplies. The beachhead wasn't just secure, it was a staging ground for the liberation of France. The battle for Normandy would continue for many more bloody weeks, but the outcome had been decided in the first few. It wasn't just won by the bravery of the soldiers on the beaches, but also by the cleverness of the planners and spies who fought a war of the mind. They had convinced the enemy to keep its most powerful weapon locked away in a garage while its house was burning down. Operation Fortitude didn't just help the D-Day landings succeed. It ensured the entire Normandy campaign would be a decisive victory for the Allies, paving the way for the ultimate downfall of the Third Reich. It remains one of the greatest deceptions in the history of warfare, a testament to the power of a well-told lie. By July 1944, the illusion so carefully crafted by the Allies began to crack. The Grand Army under General Patton, poised to strike at Calais, was a ghost. And deeper than the German High Command, a terrifying realization started to dawn. For weeks, they had clung to the belief that Normandy was a feint, a diversion. They had staked the defense of France on it. But now, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. On the front lines, the reality was brutal and undeniable. The Allies weren't just holding a beachhead, they were exploding out of it. Operation Cobra, a massive American offensive, had shattered the German lines. Tanks and infantry poured through the breach, fanning out across the French countryside. Reports flooding back to headquarters painted a grim picture. Overwhelming Allied power, collapsing German defenses, and a desperate need for reinforcements. The Phantom Army at Calais was just that, a phantom. The real threat, the main invasion, was happening right now in Normandy. German intelligence officers, men who had once confidently predicted the Calais landing, now had to face the music. Their sources, the double agents so skillfully managed by the British, had fed them a masterpiece of deception. The radio traffic, the fake camps, the inflatable tank sit, was all a brilliant, elaborate lie. By late July, the evidence was overwhelming. The 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, simply did not exist. There were no vast formations of troops preparing to cross the Potomac. The entire strategy had been based on a mirage for the German commanders in the field, like Field Marshal Rommel and von Rundstedt. This confirmation was a nightmare come to life. They had begged for the panzer divisions held in reserve near Calais. They knew that without those elite armored units, they couldn't possibly contain the Normandy breakout. Now, their worst fears were being realized. The delay had been catastrophic. The window to crush the invasion on the beaches had closed. The chance to form a strong defensive line had vanished. Every day they had waited for the real invasion at Calais was a day the Allies grew stronger in Normandy. The German army in France was now facing a two-front battle it couldn't win, one against the Allied armies and another against its own high command Estuluda. But in his headquarters, far from the front, Adolf Hitler remained a true believer. He was the architect of the Calais theory, and he would not let it go. When his intelligence chiefs presented the irrefutable proof that FUSAG was a fiction, he brushed it aside. He raged that his generals were weak-willed, that they were falling for an Allied trick. In his mind, the deception was now reversed. The news that FUSAG was fake, that was the real Allied deception, designed to make him move his reserves away from Calais just before Patton's real army attacked. It was a conspiracy of logic that only he could see. His refusal to accept reality was absolute. He was trapped in a feedback loop of his own making. He had wanted to believe in the Calais landing, so he had ignored all evidence to the contrary. Now, even when the lie was exposed, his confirmation bias was so strong that he simply invented a new layer of deception to explain it away. He insisted that the Allies were still planning a second, major landing. He ordered the 15th Army to remain dug in at the Port of Calais, guarding against an attack that would never come. These were 19 powerful divisions, including elite panzer units, sitting idle while the war was being lost in Normandy. This was the true genius of Operation Fortitude. It wasn't just about tricking the Germans. It was about exploiting the psychology of one man, Adolf Hitler. The Allies had created a story so plausible, so perfectly aligned with Hitler's own strategic assumptions, that he couldn't let it go. His own intuition, which he trusted above all else, had been turned into a weapon against him. He saw weakness and doubt in his generals, not the cold, hard facts they were presenting. His refusal to budge paralyzed the entire German command structure. No general dared to defy a direct order from the Fuhrer, even if they knew it was leading them to ruin. The consequences were devastating. As the Allies raced towards Paris, the precious panzer divisions that could have mounted a powerful counterattack were still hundreds of miles away. By the time Hitler finally, grudgingly released some of them, it was too little, too late. They were thrown into the battle piecemeal, caught in the open by Allied air power, and systematically destroyed in what became known as the Falaise Pocket. The German 7th Army was effectively annihilated. The story of Operation Fortitude South is more than just a tale of clever spycraft and inflatable tanks. It is a profound lesson in the power of psychological warfare. It demonstrates how perception can be more powerful than reality, and how a well-told lie can defeat armies more effectively than bullets and bombs. The 19 German divisions at Calais weren't destroyed in battle. They were neutralized by an idea. They were pinned down by a ghost army, held in place by the stubborn delusion of a single man. Fortitude didn't just fool Hitler. It amplified his own worst tendencies. It fed his ego, confirmed his biases, and blinded him at the most critical moment of the war. It turned his strategic judgment, once his greatest strength, into his fatal flaw. The deception ensured that the Normandy beachhead would not be just a foothold, but the beginning of the end for the Third Reich in France. The road to Paris was opened not just by the courage of Allied soldiers, but by the collapse of an illusion and the stubborn refusal of a dictator to see the truth. The liberation of France was secured, in large part, by the most successful deception in the history of warfare. Thanks for watching. If you found this chapter of history as fascinating as I do, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of strategy, deception, and the moments that changed the world. See you next time.